Today, please join me in welcoming Jack, who's going to be giving a talk on Greta Christina's book, Some Atheist Thoughts on Death and Grieving. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thanks, Ruth. All right, hi everyone. So part of what makes a church, in my mind, is that we come together as a community to mark and sometimes ceremonialize major life events, celebrating the good and honoring the solemn. Previously, when I've given this talk, some in the audience had just recently lost a family member that they were close to, and another was in stage 4 of a terminal cancer diagnosis. The first time was very soon after I returned from Virginia to attend the funeral of my grandmother, which was just a few months after I traveled back to attend the funeral of my grandfather. On the plane ride back to Seattle, I cracked open Greta Christina's book, Comforting Thoughts About Death That Have Nothing to Do with God, which I was looking forward to, in a way, for some time. Greta is one of my favorite outspoken atheists, and I think her writing deserves as much exposure as it can get. So I'm glad to be able to share some of it with you all here today. I also think it's important to amplify the voices of underrepresented groups so that people both inside and outside our community can see that there's more to atheism than just the 4 horsemen. According to her website, Greta Christina has been writing professionally since 1989 on topics including atheism, sexuality and sex positivity, LGBT issues, politics, culture, and whatever crosses her mind. Today, I'd like to read a few selections from Greta's book that resonated with me and that flow well together. A little bit of it is written in the first person, so when you hear me say I, that's Greta speaking. I've left most of it as is, but I did edit a few spots where that would be awkward. Everybody processes grief differently, so I don't mean to be prescriptive or authoritative in any way. I just wanted to share some thoughts that I found particularly meaningful. If they don't resonate with you in the same way, or if they don't speak to your life experiences, let's discuss afterwards. I'm particularly interested in hearing the perspectives of folks who weren't in attendance the previous times I've given this talk, as well as how the perspectives of those who were have shifted with the passage of time, or how they've stayed the same. Okay, so here are some comforting thoughts about death that have nothing to do with God. So here's the problem. If you don't believe in God or an afterlife, or if you believe that the existence of God or an afterlife are fundamentally unanswerable questions, or if you do believe in God or an afterlife, but you accept that your belief is just that, a belief, something you believe rather than something you know. If any of that is true for you, then death can be an appalling thing to think about. Not just frightening, not just painful, it can be paralyzing. The fact that your lifespan is an infinitesimally tiny fragment in the life of the universe, and that there is, at the very least, a strong possibility that when you die, you disappear completely and forever, and that 500 years from now, nobody will remember you. And in 5 billion years, the Earth will be boiled into the sun. This can be a profound and defining truth about your existence that you reflexively repulse, that you flinch away from and refuse to accept or even think about, consistently pushing to the back of your mind whenever it sneaks up, for fear that if you allow it to sit in your mind, even for a minute, it will swallow everything else. It can make everything you do, and everything anyone else does, seem meaningless, trivial to the point of absurdity. It can make you feel erased. It can wipe out joy. It can make your life seem like ashes in your hands. Those of us who are skeptics and doubters are sometimes dismissive of people who fervently hold beliefs they have no evidence for, simply because they find them comforting. But when you're in the grip of this sort of existential despair, it can be hard to feel like you have anything but that handful of ashes to offer them in exchange. But here's the thing. I think it's possible to be an agnostic or an atheist, or to have religious or spiritual beliefs that you don't have certainty about, and still feel okay about death. I think there are ways to look at death ways to experience the death of other people, and to contemplate our own, that allow us to feel the value of life without denying the finality of death. I can't make myself believe in things I don't actually believe, like heaven or reincarnation or a greater divine plan for our lives, simply because believing those things would make death easier to accept. And I don't think I have to, or that anyone has to. I think there are ways to think about death that are comforting, that give peace and solace, that allow our lives to have meaning and even give us more of that meaning, and that have nothing whatsoever to do with any kind of God or any kind of afterlife. Here's the first thing. The first thing is time, and the fact that we live in it. Our existence and experience are dependent on the passage of time and on change. No, not dependent. Dependent is too weak a word. Time and change are integral to who we are, the foundation of our consciousness, and it's warped and weft as well. I can't imagine what it would mean to be conscious without passing through time and being aware of it. There may be some form of existence outside of time, some plane of being in which change and the passage of time is an illusion, but it certainly isn't ours. And inherent in change is loss. The passing of time has loss and death woven into it. Each new moment kills the moment before it, and its own death is implied in the moment that comes after. There's no way to exist in the world of change without accepting loss, if only the loss of a moment in time. The way the sky looks right now, the motion of the air, the number of the birds in the tree outside the window, the temperature, the placement of your body, the position of the people in the street. It's inherent in the nature of having moments. You never get to have this exact one again. And a good thing, too, because all the things that give life joy and meaning, music, conversation, eating, dancing, playing with children, reading, thinking, making love, all of it are based on time passing and on change, and on the loss of an infinitude of moments passing through us and then behind us. Without loss and death, we don't get to have existence. We don't get to have Shakespeare or sex or Five Spice Chicken without allowing their existence and our experience of them to come into being and then pass on. We don't get to listen to Louis Armstrong without letting the E flat disappear and turn into a G. We don't get to watch Groundhog Day without letting each frame of it pass in front of us for a 24th of a second and then move on. We don't get to walk in the forest without passing by each tree and letting it fall behind us. We don't even get to stand still in the forest and gaze at one tree for hours without seeing the wind blow off a leaf, a bird break off a twig for its nest, the clouds moving behind it, each manifestation of the tree dying and a new one taking its place. And we wouldn't want to have it if we could. The alternative would be time frozen, a single frame of the film, with nothing to precede it and nothing to come after. I don't think any of us would want that. And if we don't want that, if instead we want the world of change, the world of music and talking and sex and whatnot, then it is worth our while to accept and even love the loss and the death that make it possible. Here's the second thing. Imagine for a moment stepping away from time, the way you'd step back from a physical place, to get a better perspective on it. Imagine being outside of time, looking at all of it as a whole. History, the present, the future, the way the astronauts stepped back from the Earth and saw it whole. Keep that image in your mind, like a timeline in history class, but going infinitely forward and infinitely back. And now think of a life, a segment of that timeline, one that starts in, say, 1961 and ends, say, 2037. Does that life go away when 2037 turns into 2038? Do the years 1961 through 2037 disappear from time simply because we move on from them and into a new time? Any more than Chicago disappears when we leave it behind and go to California? It does not. The time that you live in will always exist, even after you've passed out of it, just like Paris exists before you visit it and continues to exist after you leave. And the fact that people in the 23rd century will probably never know you were alive, that doesn't make your life disappear, any more than Paris disappears if your cousin Ethel never sees it. Your segment on that timeline will always have been there. The fact of your death doesn't make the time that you were alive disappear. And it doesn't make it meaningless. Yes, stepping back and contemplating all of time and space can be daunting, can make you feel tiny and trivial. And that perception isn't entirely inaccurate. It's true. The small slice of time that we have is no more important than the infinitude of time that came before we were born, or the infinitude that will follow after we die. But it's no less important either. I don't know what happens when we die. I don't know if we come back in a different body, or if we get to hover over time and space and view it in all its glory and splendor, or if our souls dissolve into the world soul the way our bodies dissolve into the ground, or if, as seems very likely, we simply disappear. I have no idea, and I don't know that it matters. What matters is we get to be alive. We get to be conscious. We get to be connected with each other and with the world. And we get to be aware of that connection and to spend a few years mucking about in its possibilities. We get to have a slice of time and space that's ours. As it happened, we got the slice that has the Beatles records, and Thai restaurants, and AIDS, and the internet. People who came before us got the slice that had horse-drawn carriages, and whist, and dysentery. Or the one that had stone huts, and Viking invasions, and pigs in the yard. And the people who come after us will get the slice that has, I don't know, flying cars, and soybean pies, and identity chips in their brains. But our slice is no less important because it comes when it does, and it's no less important because we'll leave it someday. The fact that time will continue after we die does not negate the time that we were alive. We are alive now, and nothing can erase that. The following selection comes from The Meaning of Death, Part 1 of many. We talk a lot about the meaning of life. I want to talk for a bit about the meaning of death. In the most straightforward, literal sense, when you don't believe in God or an afterlife, there is no meaning of death, not in any external, objective sense. In the godless universe, death just happens. It doesn't serve a purpose. There is no purpose. There's no intention behind its when and how and why. No designer picking people off according to some mysterious master plan. Death happens because of the laws of cause and effect in the physical universe, the laws of biology and chemistry and physics. It happens because it happens. And along with many atheists and other godless folk, I don't find this idea depressing or nihilistic. This may come as a surprise to many religious believers, but it's true. It's taken me a while to get there, but I actually find this idea rather comforting. See, the cool thing about godlessness is that you get to create your own meaning. Contrary to popular opinion, a godless life isn't a life without meaning. It's a life in which we create our own meaning. Our meaning of life, of course, but also our meaning of death. So that's what I want to talk about. Not what purpose does death serve for the non-existent designer, but instead, what meaning can death have for us? How can death shape our understanding and experience of life? What meaning of death can we create? And one of the things that works best for me is to see death permanent, designerless, physical cause and effect death as something that intimately connects us with the universe. Greta's mother died of cancer at the age of 45 when Greta was 17, 2 months after she started college. She doesn't talk about it much. It was terrible. It was traumatic. It was unbelievably shitty timing, mostly for her mother, but for Greta as well. It was unfair. Except that it wasn't unfair, any more than a star going nova is unfair, or a cliff collapsing into the sea. When you don't believe that all death happens by design, the grand cosmic design of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God who theoretically loves you, then you don't have to torture yourself wondering what you did wrong. You don't have to twist yourself into contortions trying to figure out why you're being punished, what lesson you're supposed to learn. When people die young, when people die in terrible pain, when people die freakishly for no apparent reason, you don't have to pile onto your pain and grief any extra guilt about being punished, or any extra guilt because you're trying to see reason for it and you can't. Instead, you can see death as a part of the way the world works. We are an animal species in the physical world. And animal species in the physical world get sick, or get in accidents, or get birth defects, or die in natural disasters. Sometimes good people, sometimes too young. And if it happens to you, or someone you love, it's not because you or they did something wrong. You can accept it, and grieve over it, and move on. And when it comes to contemplating your own death, you can see it in much the same way. Death is the thing that will ultimately separate you from the universe, and yet, paradoxically, it connects you with it as well. Death sucks, and premature death sucks worse. But it's part of the package deal of getting to be alive. It happens because you and all the people around you are part of the world, the physical, natural world, with all of its wonders and horrors. It's a world that doesn't really care whether you live or die, whether you suffer or rejoice. And to some people, that can seem bleak and cold. But it's a world of which we are a part, a world which we are intimately connected, down to our very molecules. Not a world that stands apart from us and punishes us for reasons we can never fathom. Without a God, you don't have to figure out what purpose your death is serving. You don't have to torture yourself trying to figure out the motivations of the physical universe. It doesn't have any. So you can accept its inevitability and get on with living your life. This final selection is called, Do We Atheists Concede the Ground of Death Too Easily? There's this notion that, sure, atheism may have better arguments and evidence, but religion is always going to win on the death question. A secular philosophy of death will never comfort people the way religion does. I've heard this idea more times than I can count. And here's the weird thing. It's not just from religious believers. I hear it from atheists too. It shocks me how easily non-believers concede the ground of death. Many of us assume that of course it would be lovely to believe in an eternal afterlife. If only that were plausible. And largely because of this assumption, we often shy away from the topic of death. We happily talk about science, sex, reality, other advantages the secular life has to offer. But we stay away from death and concede the ground before we even fight it. I think this is a huge mistake. I agree that the fear of death is one of the main reasons that people cling to religion. But I don't agree, even in the slightest, that religious philosophies of death are inherently more comforting than secular ones. And if we want to make atheism a safe place to land when people let go of their faith, we need to get these secular philosophies into the public square and let the world know what we think about death. Here's the thing you have to remember about religious beliefs in an afterlife. They're only comforting if you don't examine them. Heaven is the most obvious example. The idea of a perfect, blissful afterlife where you and everyone you love will live forever. Think about it for a moment. All your conflicts with the people you care about, do those just disappear? If they don't, how will heaven be perfectly blissful? And if they do disappear, how will you be you? Conflicts arise because people are individuals with real differences between us. In heaven, either those conflicts will still be raging, or our differences, the individuality that makes us who we are, will be eradicated. Then ask yourself this. In heaven, would we have the ability to do harm or to make bad decisions? Again, if we do, it won't be perfect or blissful. But if we don't, we've lost one of the essential things that makes us who we are. Religious believers are always going on about how free will makes us special, how it's a unique gift that God gave to humanity, how God had to make us free to do evil so that we could choose to do good. Yet, when we're in heaven, when we're in the perfect place that God created for us to be our most perfect selves, this unique gift, the gift that's the sole reason for suffering and evil, somehow vanishes into thin air? And when you're in heaven, will you remember the people who didn't make it? Will you be aware of your loved ones, or anyone for that matter, screaming and begging for mercy in the eternal agony of hell? Again, if you are aware of this torture, there is no way for heaven to be blissful, even for a microsecond. But if you're not, if you're so blissed out by God's presence that your awareness of hell is obliterated, like morphine obliterating your awareness of pain, how could you be you? Isn't our love and compassion for others one of the best, most central parts of who we are? How could we possibly be who we are and not care about the suffering of the people we love? This is not abstract philosophizing. The question of how heaven will be heaven if our loved ones are burning in hell. It's a question many Christians struggle with terribly. Greta's wife's fundamentalist grandparents were tormented because their children and grandchildren had all left the church, and they knew they were all going to burn. It created deep strife in her family and caused her grandparents great unhappiness in their old age. In fact, this monstrous notion of being so blissed out in heaven, you won't notice your loved ones shrieking for mercy in hell. This is put forward by many Christian theologians, including the supposedly respectable William Lane Craig, in response to direct questions from believers who find this whole not knowing or caring if our loved ones are in agony thing hard to swallow. And I haven't even gotten to the monotony of heaven. I haven't even started on how people need change, challenges, and growth to be happy, and how an eternity of any one thing would eventually become tedious to the point of madness. Unless, again, our personalities change so much that we'd be unrecognizable. I'm with Christopher Hitchens on this one. Heaven sounds like North Korea, an eternity of mindless conformity spent singing the praises of a powerful tyrant. In order for it to be actually perfect and blissful, our natures would have to change so radically we wouldn't be who we are. The idea is comforting if you think about it for only a moment. Ooh, eternal bliss in seeing everyone I love forever. And then immediately start thinking about something else. The same is true for every other afterlife I've heard of. Reincarnation, for instance. If dying and being reborn obliterates the memories of our past lives, then without those memories, how would we be ourselves? And it's true of our souls being dissolved into the soup of a larger world soul. Nice idea, maybe, but how is it immortality if our unique identity is gone? I have never heard of any imagined afterlife that could withstand more than a few minutes of careful examination without sounding like a nightmare. This is conspicuously not true with secular philosophies of death. Secular philosophies of death can withstand scrutiny. The idea that we didn't exist for billions of years before we were born, and that wasn't painful or bad, and death will be the same. The idea that our genes and our ideas will live on after we die. The idea that each of us was astronomically lucky to have been born at all. The idea that death is a deadline, something that helps us focus our lives and treasure the experiences we have. The idea that loss, including death, is necessary for life and change to be possible. The idea that things don't have to be permanent to be meaningful. The idea that your life, your slice of the timeline, will always have existed, even though you die. The idea that death is a natural, physical process that connects us intimately with nature and the universe. These secular philosophies of death, and others, can withstand scrutiny because they're based in reality. Most of them, anyway. There are secular notions of death that I think are self-deluded, but they are the exception, not the rule. And for many atheists, this is a profound comfort. When I was a spiritual believer, thinking about death meant being propelled into cognitive dissonance. I'd think, oh, my mom's not really dead. My friend Rob isn't really dead. I'm not really going to die. And then I'd get uncomfortable and anxious, and I'd have to think about something else right away. On some level, I knew that my spiritual beliefs didn't make sense, that they weren't supported by good evidence, that they were mostly founded on wishful thinking, that I was making them up as I went along. I was comforted by them only to the degree that I didn't think about them. And that's not a happy way to live. When I finally let go of my wishful thinking, I went through a traumatic time. I had to accept that I was never going to see my mother again, or my friend Rob, and that when I died, I would be really gone forever. That was hard. But once I started building a new secular foundation for dealing with death, I found it far more consoling. I wasn't constantly juggling a flock of inconsistent, incoherent ideas, or shoving them onto the back burner. When I was grieving the death of someone I loved, or when I was frightened by my own eternal death, I would actually, think about my ideas. I could actually feel my feelings. I could actually experience my grief and my fear, because my understanding of death was based on reality and could withstand as much exploration as I cared to give it. And I'm not the only one. I've talked with lots of non-believers about this, and I've lost count of the number who said something like, yeah, eternity seems like a good idea. Once I started thinking about it, I realized it would kind of suck. Dealing with death as an atheist seems like it'd be harsh, but actually, I find it easier. This is a subjective question, of course. If you personally don't find secular philosophies of death comforting or appealing, then you don't. But, well, actually, that's my point. It's absurd to say that religious ideas about death are inherently more appealing than secular ones. For a lot of us, they aren't. For a lot of us, the exact opposite is true. So let's stop treating death as if it belongs to religion. We don't have to be afraid of this topic. We can talk about it. And we should talk about it. There are many believers who feel the way I used to. They're having questions, they're having doubts, but they're scared to let go. They're scared to imagine a life where death is real and final. If we can get our ideas and feelings about death out into the world, these people will find it easier to let go, knowing they'll have a safe place to land when they do. We don't have to say, sure, religion is a comforting lie, but it's still a lie. The lie is not actually very comforting, and the fact that it is a lie undercuts its comfort. We do not have to concede this ground. That's all I've got for today from selections of Greta Christina's book, Comforting Thoughts About Death That Have Nothing to Do with God. There's lots more to it, of course, so it's still worth it to get the book if this topic is important to you. Part of what you'll find is a list of resources for grieving non-believers. One that I particularly like is called Grief Beyond Belief. Their website at griefbeyondbelief.org says that the aim of Grief Beyond Belief is to facilitate peer-to-peer grief support for atheists, humanists, and other free thinkers by providing spaces free of religion, spiritualism, mysticism, and evangelism, in which to share sorrow and offer the comfort of rational compassion. They also have a Facebook page. I hope those selections resonated with you as they did with me. If so, let's discuss. And if not, let's discuss. Thank you.